Hello and welcome back. In this tutorial video, we're going to look at creating an item collect. So you're going to be able to collect items and store them so that in the future, when we create the game view in the next video after this one, you'll be able to see that, okay, you've collected, number of coins or how many apples or cherries or whatever it is. So in this video, we're going to look at just the collecting apples, which is one of the fruits that's included with the game assets. Okay, so in the last video, you might have also noticed when we were fixing the edges and doing the jump fall animations that I also have this edge border, right? So previously when you ran off so if you were running on your ground and you kind of got to the end of your level or the edge of it, you could fall off the ledge or edge and then you would just constantly fall. So this just keeps you bounded within the level itself. So to create that, all I did was in our grid, so you can go grid, go to 2D objects, and then we're creating a tile map, so that creates the tile map. And then as we did for the other layers, right, you want to add a collider. So we want the tile map collider 2D, and you want to add the composite collider 2D. And so just for example, just quickly, so let's just use this as our, so if you were creating a border, right? So if you create a border around, so let's just say, for instance, this is our game view or the level, and this is the border around it. So what you want to do, because if you remember, so the colliders are, so every box here is a collider or each image in their tile map. So you want to say used by composite on your tile map collider, which just creates one collider surrounding it. And it makes it, in terms of game performance, it's going to be less intensive looking at each individual collider. So that's that part of it. The other thing that we did, same as we did for the slippery edges, so in our materials, you created the slippery material. You want to drag that to your material, which is going to make the edge slippery, which allows you to not just stick to the level boundary. And then lastly, our rigid bodies are set to dynamic. And if same as what happened with the edges, you want to make sure you set this to static, or else this level is going to fall and it's going to, when it collides with the platforms, and it's going to kind of bounce around and so on. So you just need to change your rigid body so it's static, which is now going to stick that level boundary there, and you're not going to be able to move it or manipulate it. So I'm going to just delete this because we don't want that one. So I just created it around the entire level. You might want to have at times where you don't have a level boundary, and then you can fall, and then you'll have to set a trigger which will reset you back to a spot. But we'll kind of look at that in a future video. So for now, we're going to be creating the item collecting. So in our art folder, you have, so if we go back to our pixels, so items and then fruits. And in the fruits, you have a variety of fruits. Now, I've done this a few times, so I'm going to, so the apple is done. I might actually just change it to cherries then, since that's one I don't have set up yet. So with the cherries, we are going to look at the sprite, right? So right now, if you look here, we have this image is a whole bunch of images down at the bottom here. So what this is, it's just an animation showing the cherry kind of getting smaller, and it just shows, it gives it a little bit more movement and life to the game as you work through it. So if you were to drag that in, it's going to produce this really big cherry because we haven't set these. So what you want to do is, actually it would be really small because right now our pixels is 100. So same as we did for our character, we want this set to 16 pixels per unit. This has multiple images in it. And then same thing, because these are created so our images are pixel created, so they're created with little boxes joined together. So you want to make sure this is point no filter, which again, as I mentioned with our character, it just creates a more crisp, sharp image of the character. And then we apply those settings. And then from there, we want to go to our sprite editor. So in our sprite editor, we need to slice this so that all of these images are separate. Right, so we're going to slice, and we're going to slice by grid size, and I believe these are 32 by 32. So slice, and you can just double check. So that looks right. So it goes right to the end. So 32 by 32, you apply that, and that creates our cherries. So to set up the cherry where we can collect them, so we want these as game objects, so we're not going to put them down in the tile palette. We want to put these as a game object. So you drag it into the scene. So click on the cherry 0 is what I'm going to use, drag it up into the hierarchy, which creates a game object. So right now, well, where did the game object go? Right, the game object is there. However, similar to kind of what we experienced with our with the layers when we were creating our tile maps, you need to set these in terms of where are they ordered. So currently our cherry is set to default. So we want to move it to the foreground, which moves it up to the foreground here. So that is our cherry that we're going to use as our game object. And that's it actually. So I'm going to just move it. I'll move it just to the left of us a bit and just move it down. So the cherry is there. Now, what do we want to do with this cherry? So currently if we play, it's just going to sit there. So we're going to do a quick animation. So with your cherry selected, you're going to, well, actually first we need to add an animator. So add in terms of a component. So we're going to add an animator. And then in that animator, we are going to create an animation. So with our cherry selector, we click animation, click create, and we're going to create an animation. So same as we did before, we want to organize these into our animations folder. So in the animations folder, we're going to create a folder called, so create new folder, and we'll just call it items. And then make sure you open the items, and we'll call this cherry. Right, so this is the cherry animation, and then save it, and it'll create again, same as we had for our characters, this animation box. So we're going to drag all of the images for the cherries down into the animation box, and then you can stretch these out. So they're even there, and then again you can click play to kind of see what that looks like. So that's what this animation would look like right now. It looks a little bit, so I'm going to shrink it down a bit. And let's see what that looks like. Okay, I think I like that a little bit better. So that's going to be the animation. So now when you play, right, so we're going to have this cherry in the scene, but you can't interact with it yet. Right, and that's something that we're going to look at. So there's this cherry here, but we can't interact with it. So same as with our levels, you want to make sure that you add a trigger to it. So what we're going to do is, in this case, I'm actually going to add, so you're going to add a collider, same as we did for our characters, and in terms of the tile map colliders, that was a little bit different, but this time, because it's somewhat circular sort of, I'm going to add a circle collider. And currently it's fairly big for the cherry, so I'm going to edit the collider, and then you can shrink it down so that it takes up most of the cherry there. And this time I'm going to do it a little bit differently. So rather than have it as a collider itself, I'm going to set it as a trigger, which means that you could, so right now we could play and move over, right? So it's not a physical object in the world. We're just going to, when we hit this collider, it's going to trigger an action. And that's all we need for this. The other thing that we do want to do is we want to tag it. So in our tags, we're going to add, and you can see here I have these other tags that I've created because again, I had gone through and was playing around and had some other objects that I've played with. So either way, it's the same thing. So you're going to create it. You won't have these here. Yours will probably be empty, but you're going to click add, and then we're going to add a cherry tag and save it. And then we can go back to our cherries, and you want to make sure this, where it says tag, we're going to tag as a cherry. And that's it for that. So for our cherries, I'm going to do the item collecting on our player. That way we can keep, if you had other objects, so let's say you want to collect apples or some of these other fruits, or maybe you want to add coins or whatever to your game, that's fine. But then we can just keep it all organized in one sort of script on the player. So you're going to go to your player, we're going to add a script, and we're going to call this item collector. And sorry, so make sure you click new script, so item collector, and then we're going to create and add. And I'll let that compile. Okay, so once your script is compiled, so I had it open there for a second, so it doesn't open automatically depending on how your settings are. So you want to go to your item collector script, and then you're going to say edit script, which will open the script. And then you're going to work through the script here. So what we want to do is we want to create a number of apples, or sorry, a number of cherries variable. So same as we've done for our other, so move speed and things like that, we want to create a serialize field, again in square brackets. And all that does is, again, it makes it a private variable. So this way it's only kind of maintained within this script and so on, so you can't access it elsewhere. So we're going to call this a private num cherries. And we're going to set it equal to 0. Actually, we want this as an int, so I forgot to put that in anyways. So we're going to create this as an int because you're only going to be able to have a whole number of cherries and so on. And that's it for that part of it. The start and update, we don't need to do anything for. I'll leave it there for now. You might want to, as we kind of move through, there might be other things that you might want to change on this script. But for now, we don't need that. What we do want to create, and this is where we're going to get into some of the new scripting things that become very important to allow your game objects and things to interact in the scenes. So in here, we're going to create a collider. So we want a private void and on trigger enter 2D. And then in there, so what this is creating, so in Unity, so these are, there's a couple of, so there's private void on trigger, enter 2D, and actually I'm going to put in the rest of that you would need in here. So what this does is we want to trigger a 2D with the 2D collider, and then we want to, what are we using, or what are we going to call this collision? So the collision I'm just going to call as call, right? So this is the function, so we're looking at an on trigger, so that means there's a trigger event, and then using collider 2D, and then we're calling the collision call, C-O-L-L. So if you had, so just quickly, if you had a, so if you didn't click that trigger box, you would want to use on collision enter 2D, and then in this case it's a collision 2D, and then you would give it a name. We can also call it call and so on. So those are the two kind of main ones that we will be using throughout the game. So for now, though, we're going to set this game object as a trigger. So on trigger, enter 2D. And then what do we want to happen? So we want to look at, so this is on our player, so the script. So we want to say if, so if the collision, right? So if our collision dot game object is with the player, so we want to compare it to the player. So if the collision dot game object dot compare tag is with the player, sorry there, I have a tickle in my throat. So if it's with, so compare, and this should be capital tag as well. So we want to say if the collision dot game object and then dot compare tag is the cherry, then what do we want to happen? So we want to kind of trigger that where we add cherries to our total. So if our collision dot game object, so if the collision, so again, so a collision with our player is with the game object tagged as cherry, then what do we want to happen? So we want to add an apple, or sorry, a cherry. Sorry, again, I've done this with the apple, so I'm probably going to do that quite a bit. So we want to add cherries. So how do we do that? We just say num cherries and then plus plus, which all that does is it's going to add 1 to the cherries. So currently we have 0, so it's going to add 1 to the number of cherries that we have. And then similarly, we want to set that game object as inactive. So we want to take the collision dot game object dot set active is false. Right, and what this does is, so the collision with this game object, we're going to set that game object as false, which is going to turn the game object off. So we can save this out. So we can file, save our item collector. Again, we'll let it compile. Okay, so I have this error here. So this is error on line 23. So if we go back to our script, you'll see that, and hopefully you notice it. So game object. So I just have that spelt wrong, so that's fine. So some of these debugs are often going to be just little typo errors and things like that. So we can save that. Okay, so now it's done compiling there. So I'm going to make a couple of copies of this just so that, so I'm going to duplicate it. And then let's just move one kind of over here a bit. And then I'm going to duplicate it again. And let's just move this one over here. Actually move it to this side. And so now when we play, we can look at the items as we collect them and then see that they are stored there. So you want to make sure that we have our player selected and then go down so that we can see the script. So my item collector script at the bottom here. And then what you're going to do, so again, you need to click back into the game view, right? So if you click over here and adjust something, your character doesn't work. That's because you do need to click back in the game view. So if I go and I collect a cherry, you'll notice that down here, my number of cherries increased by 1. So I can go, now I have 2, now I have 3, and so on. And what happened was when we triggered that cherry, it added 1, and it turned that game object off, right? Which means that now it's gone from the scene. So that's perfect. That's exactly what we want. So that's it for this video. In the next video, we're going to look at adding the UI so that, because again, in the game, you're not going to be able to look at this and see how many you have. So we're going to add a game view that shows your stats, i.e. in this case, the number of cherries and your number of lives and so on up in the upper left. So take care, and I'll see you in the next video.